I funded my husband's passion in silence until his mother lied about me at a family party, so I exposed them both. I'm 33 now, and I've been married to my husband, who's 34, for 5 years. We first met when I was 25, at a concert of all places. What drew me to him right away was how easygoing and charming he was. There was just something magnetic about his relaxed vibe. We exchanged numbers that night, went on a few dates, and before long we both knew we wanted to be together. Back then, he was working in IT, but his real dream had always been to become a drummer. He even had a band back in college and stayed in touch with his old bandmates. The thing is, making it in music is tough unless you're a big name, the pay is terrible and the career is anything but stable. It's a shame, but that's the truth of it. So, he stuck with his IT job to pay the bills and just jammed with his band on weekends for fun. Meanwhile, I work as a registered nurse, which anyone in the field will tell you is no walk in the park. About a year into our relationship, I suggested we move in together. Commuting from my place to his after long shifts was wearing me out, and it just made more sense to live under the same roof. We've been living together ever since. Now, that's when I started noticing some things I hadn't seen before. As much as I love my husband, he's kind of a slob. And I don't mean just a little messy, I'm talking dishes in the sink, laundry everywhere, the whole deal. After 12-hour shifts at the hospital, the last thing I want to do is come home and clean up after him like he's a teenager. But that's exactly what I found myself doing. And don't even get me started on money. He's terrible with finances. I had to take over completely paying bills, budgeting, making sure he didn't go buying random junk like he used to when he was single. When we first moved in, one whole corner of his room was packed with instruments he'd tried to learn and then abandoned halfway through. Thank God his drum set was still stored at his bandmate's place. That garage was a lifesaver. I eventually got him to sell off some of his unused gear and made sure he started living a bit more responsibly. At first, he wasn't exactly thrilled with me stepping in, but I laid it out plain and simple: if we were going to live together, he had to clean up after himself and get serious about money. He'd already been late on rent and missed bill payments multiple times before I came into the picture. That had to stop, and it did, because I put my foot down. I like to think I helped steer his life in a better direction, but not everyone saw it that way. His mother, for instance? She had a very different opinion. He introduced me to his family about 6 months into our relationship. I was expecting a warm welcome, especially since he always spoke so highly of his mom. But when I met her, it was cold. She wasn't mean exactly, not in the overt, in-your-face kind of way that you hear about with some mother-in-laws, but she was distant, uninterested, barely made any effort to be friendly. And it didn't take long before the passive-aggressive comments started. She accused me, jokingly, of course, of ruining her son's fun, saying things like, "Oh, he used to be so carefree and happy before he got tied down." I was the ball and chain in her eyes, apparently. She tried to play it off with a laugh, but I knew exactly what she meant. Still, I didn't say a word. As long as my husband didn't have a problem with the changes I was helping him make, I didn't care what his mother thought. For his sake, she and I stayed civil. Barely. We don't talk unless it's a family gathering, and even then, we keep it brief and avoid each other as much as possible. I'm not sure if my husband's ever noticed or if he just pretends not to, but either way, he's smart enough not to get in the middle of it. That's how things have been for years. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable until just a few weeks ago. My uncle passed away recently. He was a wealthy man, a self-made CEO with no wife or kids of his own. I was close to him growing up and stayed in touch over the years. He'd visit for holidays and always brought this big, joyful energy with him. He meant a lot to me. So when he passed, I was heartbroken. He left behind a fortune, and half of it came to me, with the other half going to my mom. It's a life-changing amount of money, enough to live comfortably for years. But at that moment, the money didn't matter to me. I was grieving someone I loved. And then, just 1 hour after we got back from his funeral and the reading of the will, my husband decided that was the perfect time to talk about the inheritance. No joke, he sat me down and said that now that we were rich, he could finally quit his job and follow his dream of being a full-time drummer. I couldn't believe it. I was emotionally raw, still trying to process the loss of my uncle, and he was already thinking about how to spend the money. I snapped. I told him that I had inherited that money, not we, and that I'd be the one deciding what to do with it. I didn't mean to come off so harsh. I was angry and hurting, and I just blurted it out. I actually did plan to use the money for both of us, but in that moment, it felt like he was being completely selfish and insensitive. That one outburst sparked a massive fight. He accused me of being controlling, of never supporting his dreams, of constantly nagging him about money. He said he'd spent the last 5 years putting his goals on hold just to make me happy, and now that we finally had the chance to live differently, I was still holding him back. But here's the thing, none of those sacrifices were made for me. If he didn't want to grow up and live like a responsible adult, then he shouldn't have gotten into a serious relationship. He could have stayed single, played his music, and lived however he wanted. But when you decide to build a life with someone, when you ask them to move in with you, you have to be ready to share responsibilities too. That argument of ours dragged on for over an hour. There was a lot of yelling, hurtful words thrown around. Honestly, it got ugly. Both of us were in the wrong, and it was probably the worst fight we've ever had. We didn't speak for days afterward. I was heartbroken, but I refused to be the first one to reach out. The things I said came from a place of anger in the heat of the moment, but what he said, those were feelings he'd clearly been holding inside for years, and he finally let them all out. Then yesterday morning, he finally broke the silence. He came up to me and apologized for everything he'd said and told me he wished he could take it all back. That was enough for me to let my guard down, and I told him I was sorry, too. At that point, I just wanted us to move past it. The silent treatment eats me up inside, and to top it off, today's our wedding anniversary. The last thing I wanted was to spend this day fighting. We both agreed to pause the argument and revisit it later, once we'd had time to think things through. It felt like the most mature way to handle something so emotional and complicated. He also mentioned that his mom was planning a dinner to celebrate our 5th anniversary. Now, spending the evening with my mother-in-law wasn't exactly on my wish list, but he promised me something in return, a weekend getaway to the hills, the one we'd been putting off for what felt like forever because of work. So, I gave in. I figured, hey, it's just one dinner. How bad could it really be? And to be fair, this was the first time his mom had actually gone out of her way to do something kind for us. That had to count for something, right? So I put on a nice outfit, got my hair done, and we headed over to her house in the evening. When we got there, I was genuinely surprised. She decorated the place beautifully, elegant and thoughtful touches everywhere. I was impressed, considering the tension between us over the years. I even told her the setup looked wonderful. And that's when she said something that completely threw me off. She smiled and said her son had finally given her a reason to celebrate. I didn't know what she meant by that. We've been married for 5 years, so why now? I wasn't pregnant or anything, so her words didn't make a whole lot of sense. But the party was already in motion, and there were guests around, so I brushed it off and tried to stay in the moment. Eventually, dinner was served. Just as my husband and I were about to sit down, my mother-in-law raised her glass. I assumed she was going to toast our anniversary. But nope. Instead, she launched into this whole speech dedicated just to her son. She talked about how proud she was of him, how he'd worked hard enough to retire early and could now chase his dream of being a full-time drummer. Then, staring straight at me, she said how he'd succeeded without any support, how he'd risen above the voices that told him he couldn't do it, and how, despite all of that, he was finally going to live the life he was meant to live. I sat there stunned, trying to wrap my head around what she was saying. I turned to my husband, who was sitting right next to me, and he leaned in to whisper the truth. He admitted that he'd told her he was planning to quit his job soon and go back to drumming full-time. But, and here's the kicker, he couldn't bring himself to tell her the real plan, which was that he intended to live off my inheritance. So instead, he told her that he'd saved up enough on his own to make it work. I was livid. Not only had we not agreed to any of this, but I also didn't want him diving back into music for a reason. He's not nearly good enough to make it professionally. That's not me being cruel. It's just the truth. He's an amateur at best. And no, just because I came into some money doesn't mean he suddenly gets to throw responsibility out the window and live like a teenager again. But what really hit me was the part about me not supporting him. That was a low blow, especially because both he and I know that I've had his back every step of the way. I've kept him grounded. I helped him stay on track when no one else would. And when his mother stood there painting me like some controlling villain, he just sat there. Silent. Not one word in my defense. That was my breaking point. I stood up, even though he was whispering at me to sit down and not make a scene. I ignored him. I looked straight at my mother-in-law and calmly told everyone the truth. I said that her son hadn't been working harder than me. In fact, he wouldn't be anywhere close to retirement if I hadn't stepped in to manage his life. I called it like it was. He was a man-child, and the only reason he ever stayed afloat financially was because I was there, doing the work she never did, teaching him how to handle money and be an adult. Then I dropped the real bombshell. I told everyone that the money she was bragging about wasn't his savings, it was my inheritance from my late uncle. And now, it was going to stay mine, because I was done. Done with her. Done with him. People were already stunned after her speech, but mine took things to another level. I could literally see jaws drop. My own parents were there too, and unlike everyone else, they were smiling. Quietly, but they were proud of me for standing up for myself. After that, I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out while my husband tried to stop me, calling my name. I didn't look back. I took the car and checked into a hotel nearby just to get some space and clear my head. There was no way I could walk back into that house and pretend like everything was fine. I've been sitting here for a couple of hours now. I've cooled off a bit, but I'm still struggling to make peace with everything that happened. The betrayal, the lies, the embarrassment. I've stuck it out for 5 years, cleaning up his messes, handling our money, keeping things together, and what do I get in return? A husband who's never been truly hardworking, who's only had 2 small raises in 5 years because, let's face it, he's lazy when it comes to work. Look, I understand that my husband's never really had a passion for his job. But that doesn't mean he gets to just walk away from it, especially not when he still has bills to pay like everyone else. And what really made my blood boil was the way his mother had the nerve to call me unsupportive. I've always tried to be there for him, encouraging him to chase his dreams, sure, but with some common sense attached. I never told him to give up music, I just wanted him to be practical and not throw himself into an unpredictable career with no safety net. His mom, on the other hand, acts like her son not having a good time 24/7 is the end of the world. What I can't wrap my head around is why he even told her anything in the first place when we hadn't talked about it ourselves. That was between the two of us. Not him and his mommy. He's been blowing up my phone ever since I left that night. Text after text. I haven't read a single one. Honestly, I don't even want to know what he has to say right now. I'm beyond furious about how everything went down, and no apology sent over text is going to make this right. What I really need to know is whether my anger is justified or if maybe I blew things out of proportion. Was I wrong for telling my mother-in-law the truth after she accused me of not supporting her precious son? Before I get into what happened next, I just want to say thank you. To everyone who took a moment to reach out, offer kind words, or share advice, it meant a lot more to me than I can even explain. I'm still staying at the hotel, but earlier this morning, I finally decided to respond to my husband. It had been 2 days since I walked out, and I figured it was time. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I went ahead and read all his messages first. They were mostly just apologies. He kept saying he was sorry for the mess he caused and swore he had no idea his mom would do something like that. He said if he'd known, he never would have asked me to go to the dinner. He didn't go into a lot of detail over text. Mostly, he just begged me to come talk to him so he could explain things properly. And honestly, I needed answers. I needed to hear how he thought any of this could be explained away. So I went home to meet him before he left for work. That's when he finally told me what happened. The night before he apologized, he'd been on the phone with his mother. He told her he wanted to quit his job and focus on being a drummer again, but instead of saying we were still figuring things out, or even admitting that we hadn't talked about it at all, he told her I was forcing him to keep working. He didn't bring up the inheritance, because he knew she wouldn't approve of him living off my money. And his mom? Just like always, she egged him on. She told him he should do what he wants, and not let me control his life. That I was the one holding him back from being happy. He said that hit him hard, especially because we were already in the middle of a fight. Her words just pushed him further into this mindset that I was the bad guy. He admitted that he told her if I didn't support his plan to quit his job, he'd leave me. And apparently, that thrilled her. She was more than happy at the thought of us splitting up. None of that really surprised me, sadly. But the next day, he came to his senses, at least, that's what he said, and tried to make amends. Only now, he was stuck with the lie he'd told his mom. So when she called to follow up, he doubled down. Told her we'd talked it out, that he convinced me to agree, and that I only said yes after he threatened to leave. She wasn't thrilled that we weren't getting divorced, but she was over the moon that he was finally going to be a real musician again. So she offered to host the anniversary dinner herself, and that's how this whole charade got started. So yeah, he lied to his mother just to avoid conflict. Then he lied some more to protect his pride. And in the process, he made me look like the villain. He threw me under the bus without a second thought, all to save face. And the worst part? Even while he was telling me all this, he was still trying to play the victim. Like he was just a guy stuck between his overbearing mom and his demanding wife. That's when it hit me. I hadn't been a wife to this man, I'd been his parent. I was the one keeping him on track, guiding him, setting boundaries, and picking up the slack. This whole time, I thought I was being supportive, but really, I was just enabling someone who refused to grow up. That realization hit me like a freight train. He wasn't the victim. I was. I married a grown man who never stopped acting like a boy. So right then and there, I made up my mind. If he wanted to go chase some dream of being a drummer, even though he's nowhere near good enough to go pro, he could go right ahead. But he'd be doing it without me. I packed up a few of my things while he tried pleading with me to stay. He begged. He cried. But I was done. I told him plain and simple I wasn't going to baby him anymore. If he wanted to live life without the nagging wife holding him back, he could have exactly that. And then I walked out. I blocked him on everything. Phone, social media, email. I just couldn't handle hearing from him anymore. My heart is shattered, and I hate how it all ended, but I know this marriage is over. I fought so hard to make it work, but deep down, I can finally admit that we were never truly compatible. He's always been lazy, and that hasn't changed, not with his job, not with his goals, not with anything. 5 years, and he's still earning the same paycheck while I've made real progress in my career. The only thing that kept us going this long was my love for him, and this silly hope that maybe, someday, he'd grow up and realize I was trying to help him, not hurt him. But that day never came. And I'm just exhausted from waiting. So yeah, he's on his own now. And so am I. And for the folks out there saying I abandoned my husband the moment I got more money than him, miss me with that misogynistic nonsense. I always earned more than him. That was never the issue. This was never about money. This was about respect, responsibility, and being in a real partnership. And once I realized I was the only one doing the work in this relationship, well, I knew it was time to let go. And honestly, if I really were a gold digger like some folks are claiming, then why on earth would I have married someone who earned less than I did? That alone should tell you something. The truth is, I would have absolutely shared the inheritance with my husband if only he'd come to me and had a calm, grown-up conversation about it. But instead, he blindsided me with this whole fantasy about quitting his job, right when I was in the middle of mourning someone I loved. Timing matters. Compassion matters. It's just basic decency. And to all the people out there saying I didn't support his passion for music, let me just say this, it's really easy to talk about chasing dreams when you're not the one footing the bills. I tried. I truly did. But the hard reality is, he never put real effort into getting better. He dabbled. He coasted. He was an amateur, plain and simple. He never pushed himself the way someone needs to if they actually want to make it in such a competitive field. Even so, I was there. I went to his gigs. I clapped along, I cheered. I even paid for professional lessons to help him improve. But he quit those too, claimed the instructors didn't get him because they were professionally trained and he was self-taught. That was his excuse. Always some reason why he couldn't stick with anything. So yeah, I tried to be supportive. But it's not easy when you're the one grinding through double shifts, keeping the lights on and the rent paid, while your husband spends his weekends goofing around with his drum set like it's some high school garage band. At the end of the day, though, I've gotten more support than hate from people, and for that, I'm incredibly thankful. Still, I felt like I owed it to everyone to explain why things with him were never going to work out. His priorities were always crystal clear, his music and his mother came first. Every single time. And I was just tired, so tired, of making him the priority when he'd never do the same for me. Now, as for why I was so protective of that inheritance money, well, that's something I hadn't shared until now. It's personal. Sensitive. But here it is, I'm in my 30s now, and I don't have children. But I want them. Desperately. My husband knew that. We'd been trying for years, without success. So I'd been thinking that maybe, just maybe, we'd use some of that money to start IVF. And if that didn't work out, we could look into adoption or surrogacy. I was planning for our family's future. Meanwhile, all he could think about was quitting his job to play drums and relive some rockstar fantasy he'd never let go of back when he was still living off mommy and daddy and blowing money like it grew on trees. He wasn't thinking about a future child. He wasn't thinking about us. He was only thinking about himself. So I left. I changed my phone number and made sure he has no way to reach me. I also told all the mutual friends we shared that I don't want any contact with him, period. If he tries to get in touch through them, they've been told not to relay any messages. The next time we speak, it's going to be through lawyers. Speaking of which, hey again, everyone. It's been a little while since my last update, but I wanted to let you know that I did it. I found a great attorney a few days ago, and I've officially filed for divorce. The papers are ready, and soon, they'll be served. Apparently, he and his mother had the audacity to show up at my parents' house, probably to apologize and see if they could figure out where I was. But my parents? They weren't having it. They saw everything firsthand. They lived through it with me. They know what his mother's like, and they told the both of them to leave and never come back. It's so obvious that this sudden apology is just about the money. That's all it ever was for them in the end. But I've got the resources now to make sure he never touches a cent of it. I've hired one of the best lawyers I could find, and with any luck, I'll be able to protect what's rightfully mine, what my uncle entrusted to me. And this time, I'm making sure no one else gets to take advantage of that.